Before I start to get into my preliminary reflections in a Christian-Muslim dialogue, and you see already it's something that will be definitely challenging. So I had to decide there are two ways to deal with this task. The one would be I would choose something from the rich Islamic tradition and show as an example how I could bring that together with some Christian approach. That would be the one. And the other one would be I deal with the questions that Muslim lawyers would ask me if I get to them with comparative theology. So I thought the second one is more challenging, because the first thing that I got as an answer when I questioned them in regard of comparative theology, some colleagues, they asked me, so what is that and why do we need that? And before we start, I would like to read you a text that maybe shows you when was the first time that I was dealing with Islamic law and comparative theology. So it was not that I learned that by the soft way, that means learning just the academic and then getting slowly in touch with it. I learned it the hard way, see how people are living it, and then trying to figure it out what it means. There was a situation in a desert, like many of that what happens in theological context. And therefore I choose that, and I will read you from the book of Klaus von Stosch, where he describes this moment, because he's one of the figures who challenged me during this moment. And this moment is we are in the desert and with some Muslim colleagues and Klaus von Stosch, and we are now about to perform the prayers. And we needed to find a place to do the wudu, and we found something where we did not really expect that moment, that there would be water, that we can perform the prayers. And Klaus is describing this moment, what happened to him. And I would like to read that to you and then tell you what was the question during the prayers that I asked myself. So you shouldn't ask yourself questions, but the thing was, it was that I was really confused. I think this is the word that I can really say, because everything else would be not really exact. So he's describing this moment. Essentiell ist mir dieses Reinigungsritual dennoch fremd geblieben, bis ich einmal das Glück hatte, es in seiner ursprünglichen Umgebung vollziehen zu dürfen. Mit muslimischen Freunden war ich in der Wüste unterwegs. Ausgerechnet zur Mittagszeit kamen wir an einer kleinen Quelle vorbei. Wir vollzogen alle gemeinsam in dieser Quelle die rituelle Waschung, um danach gemeinsam zu beten. Das kühle Nass der Quelle hat mich in kaum ausdrückender Weise für Gottes Gegenwart geöffnet. Und ich habe mich nach der Waschung reiner und Gott näher gefühlt. Es war auch schön, die Waschung gemeinsam zu vollziehen, in froher Erwartung des gemeinsamen Betens und des auch körperlichen Spürens der Gemeinschaft, des gemeinsamen Niederwerfens vor Gott. Ich werde mich immer, wenn ich eine rituelle Waschung vollziehe, an diesen Moment zurückerinnern. Und ich verstehe jetzt, was es heißt, sich mit Mohammed und seinen Gefährten verbunden zu fühlen, indem ich ein Ritual vollziehe, das erst in der Wüste seine volle Kraft entfalten mag. So this very beautiful way how to describe such an, for him, very emotional, for me, very confusing moment, was that I was asking myself during the ritual prayer, what the hell is happening? A Christian is next to me and he's performing the ritual prayer. I never prayed with a Christian next to me the Muslim prayer. So it's very confusing. So you ask yourself, is that valid? So the first answer I gave to myself, I said, who cares? The Imam is taking the entire responsibility. This is a simple way. And if there is something, it's up to him. I'm one of the members. That's what happened. But to be honest, this simple, it is even the Imam himself had this question, because he was my roommate in Jerusalem. So in the evening, he asked me, I know you are very close to him, and I'm not sure to ask you that, but I will ask you. So this was very, very confusing, this guy. He was praying with us. What do you think? I said, I'm not sure if it's valid, so we should check that. So the first thing what we did is to see if there's something in the tradition which describes such a thing. And of course you find in tradition very weird things, like drunken people, like other weird people, but a Christian who is still, hopefully, is with a clear mind and doing such a thing, it's very unusual thing. So this was my first encounter of Islamic law in comparative theology. So doing comparative theology and Islamic theology and Islamic law. So what I would like to do with you today is more a kind of preparing questions and maybe some ideas that I would like to share with you and maybe learn from your thoughts. That's what I'm planning. So it's not that I will deliver you a clear answer what I think it's a good way to deal with the Islamic law and comparative theology. It's more that I would like to develop some questions and ideas. So and I will start with a question that will be mostly raised of Muslim scholars in a legal field. So is there a need for comparative theology in the context of Islamic law? And after that, I would like to go to some religious theological basic assumptions that I think are necessary and how we could maybe deal with it. And then from that, what Klaus, Marianne Moyer and Catherine Cornell developed, the attitudes, methods and forms of learning in comparative theology, showing how the opportunities and also the challenges are working. And then in the last step is that what I already mentioned at the beginning, to show fields where we could work with each other and where I think there is potential in a Christian-Muslim dialogue. So the question, why dealing with comparative theology, is simply when you look in the past, so this is what I would say the tradition, if I look back, there is something that I would say answer with the idea, there was a shared social space and historical tradition. And just by that fact, there's always a necessity to deal with law, which is just one aspect of social space or reflection of social space, to consider all possibilities that could influence law. So by that would be the answer. If you look back, the Muslims lived with Christians, with pagans, with Jews. So there is already by that a necessity. But once you look into the books of the traditional classical manuals of jurists, you will find mostly two approaches in regard of non-Muslims. If they are more in a Christian context, they deal with Christians. If they are with Jews, so with Jews. If they are with Hindus, in the context of Hinduism. And there is mostly something that you can say it's either polemical or it's just to show why we are in a specific way better than the other one. So that's the two approaches that they have. Why the way the Muslims deal with law is better. So to find this space of joint working and learning from each other, and even in the period of that what we call sometimes the golden age in Spain, you will not find such a thing that there would be a force to work with each other. It was mostly either it was strategic or it was sometimes more forced by political circumstances. Lena Salama is trying to show that you can also look in a different way on that, what I call the Islamic tradition. So she's writing in her book, The Beginnings of Islamic Law, Late Antique Islamic Legal Traditions. Studies in early Muslim jurisprudence. The Muslims community was an interpretive community that gave meaning to legal texts in ways that cut across social, geographic, and confessional boundaries. And by that, the Christians were always also included from the beginning. And to get a full interpretation of legal relevant texts like the Quran and the Sunnah, she says it's even a necessity to deal with the different understandings of a specific concept, word, or even the entire philosophy of law. To go that far back, if we go through the tradition, you will find mostly this kind of different approach. So there will be never something, as far as I could check the different manuals, you will not find something that you would say there was a Christian-Muslim encounter in regard of Islamic law. If we come now in the present day, I would say, besides that, what I mentioned from the tradition, there is a globalized world which is full with dynamically changes, which forces Muslims, not just by the circumstances that a lot of Muslims are living now in such thing like non-Muslim countries, whatever that means. And therefore, I think there can be, even by that aspect, a necessity. Besides that, we have now in the university context of Germany development that called Islamic Theology. And therefore, I think just by this changings of the past 10, 11 years, there is even a chance to deal with the comparative theology and even to learn from the different methods. So that means these circumstances of present even can be a luxurious moment that we cannot find in the past. But nevertheless, I want to get back to the question that I raised at the beginning. Is there a need for comparative theology in the context of Islamic law? So when I spoke to colleagues in Indian context, or Indian Pakistani context, or in Arab context, mostly they're bringing up two aspects. So they tell me, listen, we have such a thing already. If it's about that, comparing different views of law, what the hell do you want to do with comparative theology? We have something like ilm al-ikhtilaf, or we have the fiqh al-muqaran. So there are aspects that we can use. We don't need that, what you're bringing up. So describing ilm al-ikhtilaf would be, it's a study of opinions of jurists with or without an expose of their respective evidence and answers to opposing views. The primary objective here is the differences of the jurists inside a school or in the other schools. So it's more about the differences inside the Muslim context. A more modern and something which is not that traditional, recent, that we can find in the Egyptian context is the fiqh al-muqaran. So comparing one law system, one law norm, one law aspect with another secular law aspect. Sometimes just to show where the differences are and why these differences are. But only on the legal level. That means just by the fact that we don't find such a thing like comparative theology in the tradition, there can be even a chance to develop such a thing. But we have nuances of comparing things inside the Muslim schools and outside the Muslim schools, but never with a theological approach. Mostly it happened inside the Islamic theology, or just on the level of secular law systems with such a thing like a system of a law in context of religion. So therefore I would say there is a need, or at least a chance, to deal with the comparative theology. I leave that open. Maybe I can bring some more clarity to that in the last point. Which religious theological basic assumptions are necessary? So the next thing that I mostly hear from all these colleagues is, we have that, we don't need that. And secondly, Idris, what do you want to do with the Christians? They don't have a law. They don't even know what law is. If you get to them, they say, we have law, it's a canonical law inside, that's it. We don't need law. Jesus came to abolish that. And I want to bring these two arguments that mostly are mentioned by these colleagues. So Christianity has refrained from the burdening religion with legal provisions and has replaced the law with the gospel. Therefore, considering the law critical practice of Jesus one must reject law in the context of religion. So that's the one. The other one is non-Muslims are not allowed to participate in reforming process, engage in legal discourses, in legal development of Islamic law. So these are arguments that will be raised if you deal with Muslim legal scholars. First, show me what should I compare with them, what can I even bring in a language level, and the second one is, why do you want to engage Muslims, non-Muslims, in a very clear Muslim context? To the first one, to the first rejection argument, I would like to bring aspects that Klaus von Stosch is mentioning in different books and also articles. So, in regard of the aspect of law and Christianity, he mentions that the context of Jesus was different than from that of Muhammad, without a doubt. Jesus worked in a context, or came in a context where we had a clear law in a secular context, the Roman law, and in a religious context, the Jewish law. Muhammad had a different challenge, and he had to deal with different circumstances. Recent Christian exegesis makes it clear that Jesus was a Jew throughout his life and accordingly also observed Jewish religious law. So that would actually invites me to deal with the Jews and not with the Christians. This is what ZeKK will do. So therefore, I'm taking the more challenging thing. So he will have the other one. Exegesis sees the dispute of the Pharisees, and this is what mostly is raised from Christians and Muslims if it comes to the context of law and Christianity, that he was just sent to not bring the smallest change to the religious law. So if you bring that Jesus came to abolish law, you can bring that up with the modern exegesis that this is not the case. The second thing is, Jesus did not oppose the law, but simply paid attention to its human application and interpretation. So Jesus worked in the same way as Abu Hamid al-Ghazali is trying to bring that up. He says the Sharia is for the people and not the people for the Sharia. So if we bring that to that context, that means Jesus came not with the purpose to abolish the law, but more to bring it in a human application and interpretation. So this to the first rejection. The second one is a little bit challenging. It's why should we consider non-Muslims in a context of law? So because this is something that is really sensitive. And I want to mention a very interesting discussion in the classical context. It's about legal reasoning, and if non-Muslims are allowed to engage in legal reasoning, so ijtihad, and can be a non-Muslim a mujtahid. And we have two oppositions, like always in law, so sometimes you have just two people, but three opinions. In this case, I will just present you two opinions. The one is of Al-Amidi, where he says, listen, non-Muslims, and he refers to Christians, they don't even understand law. And now you want to bring them to the most highest level as a legal scholar where you can get, so a mujtahid. This is nonsense, because a mujtahid needs to represent that what he is in a confessional way. So he is interpreting something that he is believing in. And a non-Muslim cannot do that. Therefore, he's rejecting it. More creative is the approach of Shatibi and At-Tufi. Both are trying to show one thing. They show, listen, we Muslims did not invent the wheel. And don't be shocked about that. But what we did is we have a very robust legal tradition. And before that, there was also legal tradition, and there were mujtahids in their context. And what we can do is we can even learn from these mujtahids. And these mujtahids, these non-Muslim mujtahids, need to compete with the rest of the Muslims. So therefore, they said, of course they can be. Even a mujtahid, a non-Muslim can be a mujtahid. So it's a very interesting thing to allow that. And Shatibi is going even beyond that, and I will get to that more in my last point, is He says, if we have non-Muslims engaging in legal discourses, it would be good to do that even on an abstract level, so on the principle, on the maxims of Islam. Because these are the mastering of the area. So he says, a mujtahid, first condition of a mujtahid is he should perform the maqasid. So he should be able to understand and to interpret the entire maqasid al-sharia concepts. So he says that even for the non-Muslims. So that means these two rejections and also this idea of that, should we accept now the concept of non-Muslims having them in the context of Islamic law? We can find in the tradition that there were already this discussion, and they allowed them even in the most sensitive context. So in the area of ijtihad, of reforming law, and even thinking law for the beyond the normal context. One thing that both Tufi and Shatibi are agreeing is, in this discourse of Muslims and non-Muslims, there is one essential and crucial thing. If people are coming together, there must be a clarity about what is law, what are norms, what are ethics. So therefore, both of them are proclaiming there should be a clear understanding of on both sides on the terms, what specifically should be discussed and what specifically is the different understanding. So there is something that I would say there is a qualification condition. So it's not that any discourse should be able with non-Muslims, in the context of Islamic law. There should be a clear condition of qualification. Coming up to the next point, which I find very interesting, and this is what my colleague Muna Tatari already mentioned. You have two choices. Either you invent the wheel new, or you use the wheel which is functioning quite well. And I decided for the last one to say, I mean, there is already great job done by Catherine Connell, by Marianne Moyer and Klaus von Stosch in different areas, and all other colleagues that I did not mention here. But still there is this question, what to do with it if it comes in the context of Islamic law. I just collected them here and showed what the different attitudes, methods, and forms of learning are. I mean, most of the people here and also in the audience, digital audience, know them, so there I will not repeat them. But one thing that I realized is, what was mostly the context when the Prophet explained law or dealt with law? So my question was, the most sufficient context where law is developed is in the area of the practice of the Prophet. So it's not just the Quranic verses, it's mostly the prophetic life. And what I realized is that mostly when you look into this hadith, you will find something that I would call Nasia. So the Prophet is using a very typical Arabic concept, pre-Islamic concept, to remind the people, to give them a kind of moral advice. And I by myself experienced that when I was engaged with non-Muslims, especially in the Christian-Muslim context, I will show that in the last slide, it was mostly a kind of a reminder for me. It reminded me on something that I forgot about law. I forgot about legal tradition. And I want to use that concept that Talal Asad did develop in the context of moral political criticism. And I think that can be a very fruitful frame for all that what already are developed. Because I don't want to bring just a new Muslim or something that is more common to the theology of the Muslims, but I think it is in a law context working better. So therefore, I would like to just quickly summarize what the understanding of Talal Asad is in regard of moral political criticism. So Nasia is such a thing that he is using in a different concepts in different ways, and I would use it as a remnants and critical encounter. This is how I understand Nasia. So he's referring to a very famous hadith that is used in different collections. It can be translated, religion is integrity. And we said, to whom? The prophet said, to God, his book, to his prophet, and to the leaders in the common folk. And it's quite interesting that this Nasia concept includes a lot of different approaches. And Talal Asad is trying to bring that in a context of political criticism, but I think there is potential to use that also in a legal context. So for him, Nasia is a comprehensive theological concept which cannot be reduced to the acquisition of that which is good for the person advised or of reminiscence, but rather a religious political space, divinely sanctioned and internally valid, within which rational discussion, debate, and criticism can be conducted. So it's very beautiful how it is understood by him. It's not that the Nasia is mostly of an inferior and superior person, one who is experienced going to the other one. It's more a space where something is happening. And what is happening? The discussion, debate, criticism is not just a one-sided assault. It invites argumentative exchange, and even roles are not fixed in the frame of exchange. So that means it can happen in a very fruitful way. And when we see legal advices or legal approach that the Prophet gives to the people, it's mostly in this kind of context. And the people are asking and engaging with them. Even the Jews are asking him in regard of law aspects. So I find that context very interesting to work on that concept. So Nasia is a practice which is not just a right, as Talal Asad understands it, it's a duty. So engaging and asking and learning and reflecting with the people who are around you is something that he gets from this concept. And then he's coming to that, what we heard already from Muna, to the aspect of deen. Deen relates more to how one lives and is engaged with the reality than to what one believes. So the Nasia concept even forces you to live this, what he describes as deen. And I find it quite interesting to see what this very famous hadith is reflecting to, and I can very well imagine to give that in a frame where all these forms of learning can happen, all these methods that are developed, especially this micrological turning point or the problem-oriented approach. No one is going to someone when he has not really a problem. So that's mostly happening in this context. It's just an idea that I had to bring that in a context where the most of the legal advice of the Prophet happens. So I'm coming to my final thoughts and slides, because I already got the sign by Abdurrahman that I don't have that much time. So some fields of application and practical examples. There are different levels where we could engage and learn from each other. I will just mention 3 of them. The one is on the level of ibadah, the other one on the muamalat, and the other one which is more on the theory of law, the usuli level. On the level of ibadah, this is what comparative theology is mostly. It's experience that you make once you are in this context. I never thought about the common prayer that much as long as I was not in the context of the Christian-Muslim dialogue. So the first time that I was thinking about the ethics of law, the ethics of prayer, was when I was not thinking anymore as it's something that is normal. Everyone is doing it. So it's nothing special. It was just a form of, I would call, a body. And the soul aspects, which were much more essential to it, were just at the moments when I got questioned from non-Muslims, from colleagues who were asking me, why, what, and everything, why this move? And so all these questions that you never raised will be raised, and then you understand that your own law that you understood had a layer that you may be for God. So it was a kind of an indirect Nasia to remind such a thing that is inside. On the Mu'amalat level, there was a big conference in Paderborn by Klaus von Stosch and another colleague on marriage. So marriage is something that if you go to very typical legal traditional books, the jurists are not that romantic. So they're writing, it's a contract. Don't make a big deal of it. You get married, that's it. And then you see the Christian sacraments with so much into it, how much love they put into it, bringing God into it, and everyone who's around, and you think by yourself, wow, there's a lot of love into it. And then you ask yourself, is really the marriage such a thing? And you go back into this text, in legal text, and you will find much more depth to it when you ask yourself, is Nikah just this contract, or are there layers that the jurists showed, but we were not sensitive enough to get them? And my last one, and I get to the end because I already got the final call to get out, is on the usuli level. So I find different layers where we could work and where we could definitely learn from each other. And one I would like to raise is on thinking ahead and enriching legal principles and maxims. So on the qawaid and on the maqasid concepts. So these concepts, which I find by myself very fruitful for Muslims in a secular context, in the context of 21st century context, there is a lot of potential that we can get in a discussion with the colleagues in the Christian context. For example, in the context of the Christian social ethics principles, there is so much to get from. You can learn so much to enrich even levels of the maqasid in this context just by thinking and talking about very, very similar duties or laws or the maqsads that you would like to enrich. And also that what maybe is also interesting, and we are trying to develop that, is the relation between law and the ethics. So not just the ethics as understood in the way of beauty, but also in a philosophical way, how law works in a cultural, in a reality, and all the other levels, how the prayers till the fasting are a reaction to all the signs that God made, and a lot of other things. So maybe we can get to the rest of the slides that I have during the Q&A. Thank you very much for your attention.